Hello, this is a presentation of Successful Relationship Practices being presented to you by Aki Jamal Durham. Today, we're going to talk about communication. We're going to ask the question, what is communication? How and why we use it in our relationships, and why it is essential to life. First, let's start with a working definition of communication. Now, dictionary.com offers this definition. It talks about the imparting or interchange of thoughts, opinions, or information by speech, writing, or signs. Now, if we were in a group setting and we were to ask people to give us their working definition of communication, they give us some words, some phrases, probably some synonyms that we could probably boil down into what dictionary.com has offered us here. But if I could offer us another way of considering what it is a communication is, I'd like to give you this quote by Dr. John Stewart. Dr. Stewart is the author of Bridges Not Walls, a book about intercommunication, and he boils it down this way. Communication is the continuous, complex, collaborative process of verbal and nonverbal meaning making. And as we go through this presentation today, we're going to cover what it means to be continuous, complex, collaborative, and what it means to make meaning in your communications day to day. So very quickly, I'll give you a look at what it means to be continuous, why it's complex, and how it's a collaborative process, etc. So continuous. We may look at communication as a linear activity, back and forth, sometimes not even back and forth, sometimes just forth with no back. We're given information, we don't expect an answer or a response. We're just, hey, I'm giving you a fact, I'm giving you an idea. Hey, dinner's done. You don't have to respond to that. Verbally, you come to the table, sit down and eat dinner. But if we understand communication, we come to know that it is a continuous process because of the fact that it is not just verbal, but nonverbal. And we're always communicating whether we're speaking or not, particularly in our marital relationships. The people who we share the closest and most intimate spaces with, we are always in communication with them. That's why we talk about it as being continuous. It's also very complex. From the time we started learning to communicate, learning to talk, learning how to form words, sentences, eventually learning to read words and sentences, how to share them, write them, learning the appropriate dynamics of how to speak to a sibling and a friend versus how to speak to an adult or a caregiver or someone who is an authority figure. It was very complex probably to us then as we were learning those things. But once we kind of got the hang of it and we could start to move through the world and communicate with people without thinking about it, we stopped looking at it as a complex process. Well, that's not necessarily true. And to be honest with you, we have to understand that communication is complex in order to give it its just due, to give it its true level of importance in our lives, to give it full consideration. We have to realize, once again, that it is very complex. And if we don't put that front of mind, if we don't operate in our conversations and in our communication with the idea and thinking that it is a complex process, we won't handle it properly. So let's be mindful of that. So this collaborative process, this is something that has to be twofold at the very least. If we're talking to a group of people, I, for example, have been in front of large rooms of people expressing my thoughts, sharing information, and even in those moments when it's really kind of up to me to share, I get something from an audience of people. Even in those moments, it's collaborative. If they give me energy through a smile, through their body language, whether it's applause, whether it's a laugh, whatever it is, I feed from that energy and it energizes me. Even in those moments when it's almost like a monologue and I'm the only one speaking, it's collaborative. It's always collaborative, of course, when you're dealing with dialogues between people or groups. And each of us is responsible for the way we give and receive our information. We already know that it's both verbal and nonverbal. I don't know if we clearly understand what it is about conversation that's meaning making. That's probably not a foreign concept to you, but I think as we go through this presentation today, you'll come to have a greater appreciation for just exactly what it is that we are doing in terms of meaning making within our conversations and communication. So here's what we're going to cover today. First, we'll talk about the 6 primary features of communication. We'll cover some things that make perfect sense to you that aren't at all new. We might get a different spin on them, a different take, a new perspective. And then we'll cover 1 or 2 things that you may not have ever considered when you talk about communication. Next, we're going to talk about 3 opposing types of communicators. Now, there are actually 6 different types of communicators I'm going to cover, but to make it easier to understand, it makes sense to talk about one in concert with its opposite. So I'll talk about 3 different pairs of communicators in opposition to one another to round out that conversation and that discussion a little bit. Next, we'll talk about 5 levels on which we communicate. Those 5 levels are about openness. Then we'll give a list of do's and don'ts. And then we'll take this deeper dive into what communication is or should be. First, we're going to talk about these primary features of communication. And we said there are 6 of them. First, what we're going to talk about is meaning. Now, we live in a world of meaning. In fact, we live in several different worlds of meaning when you think about it from the perspective of humanity. We live in a global context and there's meaning there, but we boil it all the way down to our own home. We have different meanings in our home. We have another set of meanings in the places where we work, places where we spend our leisure time outside of the home, places where we may worship, study, you name it. There's always different meaning being made through the process of communication in those places. And if you understand it from that perspective, you get another sense of what it means for us to make meaning and why it's different in every place that we live and exist. Number 2 is choice. That may seem obvious, but choice is something we do not only through thought and contemplation, but it's also something that happens on a very subconscious level automatically. And we may ignore the fact that because it was subconscious or automatic, that it was indeed a choice. I made a choice to inflect my voice the way I did a sentence ago. You made the choice to gasp when someone said something appalling to you. It was an automatic response, but it was indeed a choice. And we have to be conscious of the fact that even subconsciously, the things that we do, the reactions we have, the things that we say are choices. Number 3, culture plays a deep role in how we communicate. Our culture is determined by our ethnicity, things like our gender, our age, our socioeconomic status, our sexual orientation, even other cultural features like our religious beliefs, whether we grew up in an urban or suburban setting, Midwestern, from the Northeast or from the South. Even within the context of your own family, there are cultural differences. For example, mother to son. There's different cultures between men and women. And the way you deal culturally as a man and the way she deals culturally as a woman adds a layer and adds nuance to the way you communicate with one another, in spite of the fact that you share your bloodline. Number 4 is identities. Identities are one of the meanings that we make within our collaborative construction of conversation and communication. Now, every person we communicate with, we have some unspoken negotiation of what our identity or ourselves are to one another. Man to woman, husband to wife. There are roles that you play and identities that fit in you into specific roles that are unique to your house and your family or your family of origin. You have a specific identity with your children, and it may be different from one child to the other. To this child, I may be, if I get an older child who I can relate to because we have the same level of sports, my identity may be different to that child than the child who I share some academic interest with. And there's a different understanding of daddy based on those things. There's identity differences at your workplace, even when you share a title with someone who is your peer, depending on how they're treated, maybe by authority figures in that place. And so identities are always at play and at work, even when you and that other individual are equal and no one is placed higher or lower. There is always a different identity placed on either individual. Next is the most common factor, if you will, of communication, and that is our conversations. It's not only the most common or ordinary piece of communication, but it's the most influential and the most significant. And we have to pay particular attention to the significance of our conversations with the people who we care most about. Your conversations with your spouse will determine the health and wellness of your relationship with your spouse. So again, it is paramount that we are purposeful in how we approach those conversations. The last one may be foreign to you. This term, nexting, a term that was coined by Dr. John Stewart, who we quoted earlier in the presentation. It's similar to the idea of paying it forward. But in the concept of communication, nexting goes back to the idea of choice. When we make the choice to be purposeful and slow to move forward with how we respond, either physically or verbally, the things we do, the posture we take, with the idea of I am creating meaning about what is going to happen next. So that's what nexting is about. Understanding that whatever choice you make, however you respond, that's going to determine what happens next in this interaction. It's going to come into play. And if you're open to thinking about that, it slows you down, it makes you more thoughtful, and it adds to some of the elements that I think help us in the flow of communication to make it healthier, particularly in our spousal relationships. Now, the types of communicators, I talked about dealing with 6 in total, 3 opposing pairs. The first one is the land the plane communicator versus the enjoy the ride communicator. The land the plane communicator is the person who says to themselves or to you, if we're going to get to point B and we're presently at point A, let's just figure out the most concise and expeditious way to get to point B. That's their DMO. The enjoy the ride type of communicator is the person who tries to appreciate the journey. It's not just about the destination. Let's talk about what kind of plane are we going to get in? Where we're going to be sitting while we're on the plane, what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink. You're going to listen to some music, you're going to watch a movie while we're on the plane, getting to our destination. And you can see how those two individuals might be in direct opposition to one another. Now, the second pair are the share your feelings communicators versus the just the facts communicators. People who like to share their feelings not only want their feelings shared, but yours too. They want to know the heart of the issue. They want to know not only what you think, but how it made you feel. Then they want to know how that feeling made you feel next, and what does their feeling make you feel. And the person who wants just the facts, well, you can give me let's talk about the time of day this happened. Okay, what exactly was said specifically? Okay, so what was the next step? It's, feelings are kind of taken away from it. It's very concrete. It's not at all abstract. It's very simplistic, just the facts. The third pair, the thinking out loud communicator versus the let's take turns style of communicator. The person who thinks out loud through their communication style approaches their conversations with you as if it's a brainstorming session. And as far as they're concerned, maybe that's what it is. Anything that comes to mind, they share it as soon as it comes to mind so they don't lose the thought and so that you get the benefit of knowing what they're thinking. The let's take turns communicator is a person who comes to you with an agenda, it's bullet points, it's got outcomes and goals, and they share those things with you before the conversation itself actually begins. Now, you likely have a default in one of these types of communication styles, but you don't necessarily only fall back on one of them. Sometimes it depends on your context. You may have a different style at work than you do at home. Hey, at home, you're comfortable with thinking out loud because, it's just the family. We're just, hey, it's loose, it's fun. Maybe or maybe even more specifically when you're out with your closest friends and you're just in your leisure time. You may be a land the plane type of person in your job because you have to be detail oriented. You're an accountant by trade, and hey, I just need to know how to finish this report. Or maybe it's what you're talking about, regardless of the environment you're in. It's the context of the conversation. You know what? Maybe you're more willing to share your feelings when you and your wife are talking about what school you and your kids are going to be going to. And maybe it's just the facts when, you're talking about the finances. That may or may not be good. That may or may not be healthy or unhealthy. It's just how you handle things. You may use any single one of these in any single moment in time, depending upon the place and the topic. The goal here is to be aware of those things, not just within yourself, but within the person you're dealing with as best you can. Yeah, it's tough. I didn't say this was going to be easy. And if you're conscious about these things, if you think about these things as often as you can, because you'll likely never get to the point where you're always able to think this prior to sitting down and having a conversation. But when you have quiet moments and you're almost practicing the conversation in your mind before you have it, and you think about these things prior to, you'll generally get a positive outcome. Next, let's talk about the communication levels I alluded to earlier. I said they were about openness. The first level is cliches. Because there's no real openness here, it's almost like non-sharing. You know, the sky is blue. That's a cliche. Everyone knows the sky is blue. There's no transparency there. And you can talk that way with just about anyone. Now, level 2 is sharing facts. And the meaning here is that you're sharing what you know. So yeah, everybody knows the sky is blue, but there's a little bit more transparency when I'm sharing things like, what the unemployment rate is. When I'm talking about, what the graduation rate is at the local high school. When I'm sharing facts like those, or when I'm sharing other facts that may just not be general common knowledge, I'm sharing a little bit about myself because, it says something that I do or don't know those things. So you can share that with many people, I would think, but it's still not a great deal of openness. Number 3 is opinion, and that's not sharing what you know, but this is now sharing what you think. Sharing what you think is slightly more transparent. And because there's some degree of transparency, we have to start talking more seriously right here about what our openness means. See, each level, as we go down, necessitates an increasing degree of these 3 things: trust, communication, and risk. Meaning there's more trust, there's more communication, there's more risk. And what that means is we are allowing ourselves to become vulnerable. And if we allow ourselves to become vulnerable, can't just do that with anyone, can't do that with many people. You can do that with some people. And some is different for every single one of us. We can't put a quantity on that. Now, if we go to another level, we're sharing emotions. Not what you know, not what you think, but what you feel. When you share what you feel, you have much transparency, much trust, much communication, much risk. You can only share this with a few people. And finally, we're just talking about absolute transparency. Not what you know, not what you think, not what you feel, but who you are. Complete transparency. Complete trust, complete communication, complete risk, and complete vulnerability. Typically, you can only share this with 1 to 3 people. Now, that varies for each of us. Some of us are just a little more open than others naturally, and we never know. If you're lucky and you work at it, and you're interested in being more transparent, and I'll tell you why you should be, maybe you can get that to 7+ if you really work at it. But it takes time, it takes willingness, it takes effort. But I guarantee you there are benefits that I'll show you. Let's talk about some do's and don'ts. Don't, if you can avoid it, be judgmental. We always use judgment, but using judgment and being judgmental are 2 different things. Using judgment is just intelligent and smart and careful. Being judgmental means that you're looking down on someone. It means that you added negative connotation to their thoughts, their feelings, their words, their actions. Being judgmental is about negativity. Use your judgment, but don't be judgmental. Don't expect too much. Conversations about things that are important to you, regardless of the level of importance, they could be day-to-day menial things, or they could be life-altering and changing. That doesn't mean they happen in a single conversation. Don't expect too much in one conversation necessarily. And don't expect a whole lot of vulnerability from yourself or from someone else as you're building intimacy and closeness and openness with that person. Don't bring up the past if you can help it. Doesn't mean that you don't talk about examples from the past to make points. But definitely don't blindside anybody with that. Definitely don't use it to try to hurt. Definitely don't use it to try to win. And if you can, agree upon it before you do it. Don't interrupt. Interruptions can be considered rude. They make a person feel disrespected. and they can stop the flow of conversation. People lose their thoughts. They get caught up in their emotion and frustration rather than the importance of the information you're sharing. It just derails your communication. Don't overstate. Phrases like always and never, they get in the way of your conversation. They're typically not true. It is very rare that someone always says or does one thing or another, or that they never say or do one thing or another. So don't overstate. Don't lose your temper. Anger will throw a kink in the works. Anger is typically a secondary emotion, and if you try to avoid the anger, look, I'm not saying don't feel angry. I'm not saying don't process your anger, but don't lose your temper, because losing your temper means you've allowed your emotions to have you rather than you having your emotions. Don't pout or give the silent treatment. Pouting casts a bad light on your communication, and pouting opens the door for negative thoughts to enter. Giving the silent treatment, silence speaks volumes. Silence almost never speaks positive volumes. Don't give the silent treatment. Don't tell endless stories. I'm not saying don't story tell. I'm not saying don't fact check based on a story. I'm not saying don't give that information if it lies within a story, but keep it brief. Be respectful of the other person's time and attention and ability to give you their attention. The world we live in, it is difficult to have attentive focus for long periods of time, even to the things that are important to us. Be understanding of that for yourself and for others. Don't compete. You either win or you lose together. If one of you loses, you both lose. Always seek win-win opportunities, specifically when you're talking about your spouse. If you understood and took your marital vows seriously, if you're a person who believes in a higher power, if you're a person who reads and believes in Christian principles specifically, you understand that you are one as a married couple. Two have become one, and you cannot lose separately. You must win together. Don't belittle or demean. When I talked about not being judgmental in the beginning, that was about your thinking. Belittle or demeaning is about the activity behind that thinking. When you use harsh words, when your actions show that you're judgmental, you're belittle or demeaning. Don't do that to anyone, particularly your spouse. Let's talk about the things you can do. Accept and tolerate. Now, when I say accept and tolerate, one of the things that you have to understand is that someone is coming to you with their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions. And while those things may ring true for them, it might not ring true for you. That's okay. Be accepting of their truth. Try to come to a common truth by tolerating their emotion and their feelings, even though you don't share and feel them. Do plan to talk again. And a plan doesn't mean like, hey, we'll talk about this again later. If at all possible, set a time, a date, a space to have that conversation. Maybe even put a little blurb about, this is what we need to talk about. Here's some of the points we need to hit. I know I went back to the let's take turns type of communicator. Well, hey, sometimes you need to have that type of style, at least before you go into it. Plan to talk again. Offer forgiveness. Harboring bad feelings, being unwilling to forgive, eats away at you individually. Before you ever consider what it does to the other person or the relationship you have with that person, it eats away at you. Now that you realize that, don't allow it to eat away at you, that person, or your relationship. Offer forgiveness. Be as courteous as to a stranger. Because we have such close relationships with the people we are married to, who are in our family, they have seen our best and our worst, and we don't necessarily care what image we put in front of them based on how we respond to them. If it's a stranger who doesn't know us by name, never seen our face before, may never see them again, we're courteous because we want to paint this picture of ourselves. Why not try to paint that picture for your spouse, for the people who are closest to you? Be accurate, or at least use estimates that aren't overstatements. Because sometimes, and it seems to me, these types of phrases, you're likely to be closer to correct when you're not using phrases like always and never, when you're talking about the things that people say and do that elicit certain feelings and responses from you. Be as accurate as you can. Control yourself. Be aware of what you're feeling. Understand how that might affect what you're saying. Be aware of your body language and be in control of those things. Again, have emotions. Don't let your emotions have you. Be positive, outgoing, and unselfish. If you understand that your relationship with your spouse in particular has to work, not just for your betterment, for the betterment of your household, and let's be honest, for the betterment of your community. If you enter into conversation with your spouse, seeking for a positive outcome, being outgoing and sharing yourself as best as you can, and being unselfish with how you deal with their feelings and your words, you can only benefit. I challenge you to tell me that's not true. Be concise. Doesn't mean every conversation has to be short, but try to share your feelings in as efficient a manner as you can. See yourself as an equal partner. This is a collaborative effort. You have equal responsibility for your feelings and theirs, and vice versa. Cooperate and be non-combative. That should kind of speak for itself. But let's be honest. In the heat of the moment, we lose control. Our feelings have us instead of us having our feelings. Sometimes that's hard to do. Focus on being cooperative. Focus on being non-combative. And be affirming and build up your mate. You married them for a reason. You fell in love with them for a reason. You're in this with them for a reason. Those reasons are things you should remember, particularly when you're moving into areas of discomfort, particularly when you're talking about dynamics in your relationship that are difficult to process. If you affirm and build up your mate, first in your own heart and mind, and then with your words and actions, it'll go a long way. Now we're going to talk about some of this information and how it kind of boils down into some very key facts about communication. So if you'll traverse through this with me a little longer, communication is a dialogue. And we understand that dialogue, as we know it to mean, is a exchange of information between two people, dia meaning two. But if we get another level of understanding of the word dialogue from its Greek origins, we know that dia from its Greek origins actually means complete or thorough, and that logos means speech or discourse. So if we look at communication as more than just conversation between two people, if we look at it at a deeper level, a complete conversation or a thorough discourse, we begin to understand communication at a level that gives it its just due, that puts it in proper perspective, that adds weight and importance to the meaning and the reasons we need to be intentional about our communication. Thorough discourse. Communication is also self-disclosure. That goes back to us talking about vulnerability. And remember, vulnerability, if we employ it, leads to transparency. And if we really take the time to appreciate transparency, we'll come to understand that through transparency, we can achieve personal growth and greater intimacy. Now, greater intimacy, maybe that one's kind of obvious. I get greater intimacy with my spouse when I share my full heart with her or him. I get greater intimacy with my closest friends when I expose my faults and flaws to them. I think that's obvious, but do we know about the personal growth that can come with that as well? When you share that information with the people who love, respect, and honor you in that relationship, and they handle that information with accountability and love, they'll help you understand the things about you that need work, the areas that need improvement, and they'll also come to help you understand what your strengths are and how you can lean on them to overcome and or change your areas of weakness. That's personal growth. Understand that self-disclosure gives you intimacy, personal growth, and growth within your relationship. Communication is hard work, and I alluded to this earlier. It is time-consuming when you sit down and make yourself be this thoughtful about it prior to and within the framework of every conversation you have. And it can be tedious if we allow ourselves to really look at the nuances, really look at the layers and complexities. It's hard work. It's worth it. Put in the time, put in the work, you'll build a better life. You put in that time, you put in that work, it's going to take time. And time is work. Understand that it's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight, but if you allow yourself to take the time, to put in the work, and to gain some sweat equity, there are benefits to be earned. Communication should reveal your perspective as well. There's a couple ways of looking at what that means. Now, your perspective means that you have one way of seeing the exact same set of information, the exact same dynamics, the exact same issue, the exact same context and framework of your life than your spouse. It's different than theirs. They have their own, you have your own. That's one way of looking at perspective. Another way of talking about communication should reveal your perspective is that there are people who will gladly impart their wisdom, whether it's wise or not, into you and your life and you and your relationships, into you and your points of interest, into you and the things that you are dealing with on a day-to-day basis from their perspective. As long as when you're communicating with your spouse, you're revealing your own perspective, you remain healthy. You can add another person's perspective and be honest that that's what you're offering. But understand that the heart of your communication should be about your perspective. And when you're offering a third party's perspective, they need to know your perspective on it. Tell them what you think and feel about what that other person offered to you. Come from your own heart. Otherwise, you're tag teaming with someone else against the person who shares the most important relationship with you, that of your spouse. Communication requires courtesy. And we said this previously, but it bears repeating. You don't demean, you don't belittle, you don't interrupt. You allow a person's heart to be open to you without judgment. Vulnerability, folks, can only happen when that courtesy comes, that transparency, that personal growth, that greater intimacy. If there's no courtesy, you block those things. Communication requires courtesy. Communication also involves body language. This goes back to that self-awareness. We don't know what our posture or the raise of the eyebrows, a deep sigh, or even a laugh, or how our stature compared to that of the other person, whether we're sitting or standing. If you're not thinking about those things, you're not really sure of what meaning you're conveying or adding to the conversation if you're not careful with your body language. So be aware of that. Another thing is timing. Timing is very important to making meaning, working collaboratively with the people you are in the greatest communication with. And what I did with this slide to illustrate the importance of timing was not click on the verbiage that comes in, because when communication doesn't happen at the right moment, you might get a little confused, you might feel blindsided. Just think about it. Until I've clicked and the communication must happen at the right moment appeared on the screen, some, if not all of you, were looking at this and thinking, okay, well, why is there, he's talking, every other time he talked, there was words on the screen, and you kind of got sidetracked. And the communication between the two of us, even though I'm the only one talking, got derailed because you got used to this flow of the words being on the screen, and that timing was off, and maybe you thought you were going to miss the point. But I made the point. At least I hope I did. And then lastly, we want to make sure that our communication has a positive regard, because communication only succeeds with positive regard. If you don't go into every communication with your spouse seeking growth, seeking love, seeking positivity, seeking the next level, seeking betterment, then you might not necessarily be setting yourself up to fail, but you're definitely missing an opportunity if you're not making sure that you look for that success by communicating with positive regard. I want to add something to this conversation. This will help kind of bring together the questions we talked about, how communication is essential in your relationships and therefore your life. The benefits of healthy spousal relationships. I'm going to click on this video. This is a video snippet. It was recorded by Together Pittsburgh. The gentleman pictured here, the gentleman presenting here rather, is John Knight. He's a former program director for Together Pittsburgh, and he's going to talk very quickly about the benefits of a healthy spousal relationship.
There's been some interesting data that supports the idea of healthy relationships. It's been proven that people in healthy relationships physically live longer. They do biologically better. We don't understand that one, but they do. They have better sex lives. They make more money. Their children do better in school. Their children do better emotionally. A healthy relationship, there's so many benefits from it.
Thank you, John. So John said we have better sex lives, we make more money, our children are healthier, we do biologically better. Some of the benefits of a healthy marriage includes living longer, as John said, better physical health, greater mental health. You're likely to be happier in your life as a whole, faster, more successful recovery from illnesses. And you generally take better care of yourself when you have someone else to consider, like a spouse. Let's wrap it all up by saying this. If you want to live your best life, Communication is the key. Our quality of life exists in direct correlation to the quality of our relationships. The health and wellness of those relationships depends deeply on the quality of our communication. This is something I cannot stress enough. This is something you cannot spend too much time trying to be more mindful of. Try to take this into consideration every day. Start your day, end your day, asking yourself how you communicated with your spouse, how you communicated with your children, how you communicated with the people you're in working and other types of living relationships with, and how could you do better tomorrow. This presentation of Successful Relationship Practices was brought to you by Aki Jamal Durham, relationship educator, author, and speaker. Thank you for allowing me to help you relate.